I'm starting to think the brain fruit might have more powers than meets the eye, because in chapter 1090 we find out that the Vega Force 1 can only fly within the airspace of Egghead Island. If it was operating on a fuel source independent of Egghead Island, this wouldn't be the case, but it is. That's what's making me think that somewhere in the Vega Force 1, there is a receiver that allows it to be powered by the signals being pumped out by Punk Records. Of course, you know, Punk Records is the massive brain of Vegapunk, and Vegapunk himself retains the ability to think because of the antenna in his head that is connected to Punk Records. What's also very interesting about this is that I think the sea beasts that are cyborgs that surround the perimeter of Egghead Island's water space are probably under the same sort of influence, but they have more freedom than the Vega Force 1, of course, because the Vega Force 1 is just a vehicle for transportation, whereas the sea beasts are tamed animals. But the reason why they consider the water space of Egghead Island their sort of hunting grounds is because of the influence of the brain fruit, keeping them locked in close perimeter to the island. Now, why do I think this? I think this because if you look at all the sea beasts that we've seen so far, and if you look at the Vega Force 1, they kind of have the same sort of art style. They're drawn in the same sort of way. They both have these visors with these little googly eyes sticking out of it, which makes me think they're sort of operating on the same sort of wavelength, on the same sort of function. And additionally, to add on to that, satellites Vegapunk Pythagoras and Vegapunk Edison also have the same art style, but unlike the Vega Force 1 and the Sea Beasts, they are actual characters, because all the satellites, for the most part, seem to have their own thoughts and feelings on certain things and have some sort of connection with Punk Records as they can dump their research into the brain itself. Now, I think the info dumping might be another ability of the brain fruit, because maybe either through the process of cloning or perhaps through the power of sentience that the brain fruit may have in some way, perhaps Vegapunk can copy his brain and then put that brain into other things. Kind of like with Big Mom, how she puts souls into things and animals and they become anthropomorphic. I think that could be a thing with Vegapunk. Either he's copying a brain, and then that brain is called like a drone brain, and then that drone brain is put into another body. But then these drone brains, much like, say, bees in a hive, can then transfer thought back to the queen, which in this case is Vegapunk's brain. But unlike drones in a hive, Vegapunk satellites can also be individuals. Now, when it comes to satellites like York, whose appetite and defecation is shared by the other satellites, I'm not sure how that works, but that also could be a brain fruit ability. It could be like, say, bodily function is perhaps transferred to a drone brain, which in this case would be York. Because the weird part about it is that the Vegapunk that says he needs to poop is the one that is the most robotic, even more robotic than Edison, which was Pythagoras. And we know Pythagoras has perished recently. But yeah, he's super robotic, as he's like a smaller robot sitting in a bigger robot. Whereas Edison, who's also robotic, seems to be at least somewhat biological, maybe. Unsure about that. But yeah, the most robotic of them, I would say, is Pythagoras, because he was like made of two components. So it's weird that he said he had to poop despite being a robot, which makes me think that maybe the matter or the need to defecate is then transferred directly to York, and she somehow, some way handles all that for all the bodies of Vegapunk. which is super weird, I have to admit. Maybe we'll get more about this in the future, but I think that has to be the case. The brain fruit can somehow transfer bodily needs to drone brains. And if that drone brain is within a drone body, then they take up that need. And then in vice versa, York can sustain the bodies of all the Vegapunks by eating copious amounts of food. And I assume the copious amounts of food that she eats is enough for 6 people or more. Now, another ability I think the brain fruit might have is the power of teleportation. The wiki says that the weird thing that Vegapunk does in chapter 1066 and 1068 is an invention in which he teleports to warp space-time. But seeing as how we don't see a device doing that, nor does he do anything to suggest he's using a device, makes me think that's a weird ability of the brain fruit. Perhaps only for him, because the brain fruit technically is localized to his body, and we've seen other devil fruit users have special abilities that only affect them. So like, say, Diamante, he can only make objects flat, not people. The only person whom he can make flat is himself. So with that being said, maybe Vegapunk has the teleportation ability, but it's only for him because Punk Records is a part of his body, because Punk Records is his brain, which is afflicted by the brain fruit. Another ability that it might have, I'm not too entirely sure on how this may work, but maybe the reason why, say, Vegapunk, York, and the rest of them aren't afflicted by the devil fruit weakness, presumably because as being maybe constructs created by the brain fruit, they aren't subjugated to devil fruit rules. Maybe that's a thing, because there have been some cases, like say with Parasparrow's candy, in which constructs created by a devil fruit can actually swim. So maybe that's another case here. York and the rest of the Vegapunk satellites technically aren't devil fruit users, despite being able to connect to a devil fruit, or being in part a construct made by a devil fruit. But that's all I have for you today. Give me your thoughts.